Arkansas Citizens for Transparency finally received the green light from the AG's office to move forward with their constitutional amendment and initiated act that would essentially enshrine our FOIA law into the Constitution. Here to talk about that and a few other topics is one of our dear friends, Robert Steinbuch. Hi, Robert.
Hey, Jenny. Always great to be with you.
Yeah, so glad that you are joining us. It's been a while. We finally got through the holidays and kind of the lull there. And so we're back. All right. I want to talk to you about the constitutional amendment and the initiated act. This has been quite the hurdle for your group to get over. Indeed. As far as sending it to the AG's office and getting the green light. Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. As you know, I think we submitted 3 different variations of the constitutional amendment and 4 variations of the initiated act. Those are 2 separate parts, but they're linked. We want to enshrine in the Constitution the right to transparency, and then the details we want to put in an initiated act, a statute, because you can't, as a practical matter at least, put so much verbiage and detail in a constitution. It doesn't work sort of theoretically. So we have these 2 components moving ahead side by side. And the Attorney General consistently denied them. And guess what? Then we filed a lawsuit.
Yeah.
The next day, he approved the constitutional amendment. Shortly thereafter, he came back to us on the initiated act and said, oh, I found another mistake that I hadn't seen in the last 3 versions. But if you fix this one more thing, I'll get it back to you very quickly. And he did, in that respect, to his credit. But nonetheless, the process is broken. The process is politicized. But we now have a version of the amendment, and we have a version of the initiated act, the proposed statute, that is, to go forward on, and we are doing exactly that. So we have to gather 75,000+ signatures on the initiated act, 95,000+ signatures on the constitutional amendment. We'll do it, and then that will be on the ballot. Those will be on the ballot, and the Arkansans will be able to vote for transparency. Oh, excuse me. I can't say transparency because Tim Griffin throughout the process says, well, either he doesn't understand what the word transparency means, or it's somehow politically loaded.
I was going to say, it's too political. Don't say that, Robert.
It's too political. I don't want to be too political, against a political animal, but I don't want to be too political. So the word is disclosure. That's not political, but transparency is political. That's one of these silly changes that Tim Griffin demanded that we put in. In the end of the day, I think Arkansans are indeed smart enough to know that they mean the same thing. So we're not terribly concerned about the distinction, but it's just another example of Tim Griffin throwing roadblocks into the democratic process, which was only stopped because we sued him.
Yeah, so 2 things. I want to talk to you about the lawsuit that was recently dropped. And then there were some words exchanged with Griffin's statement. And then the group came out with a statement as well. And then I want to get back to the process. But first, let's talk about the lawsuit. The lawsuit was dropped. Griffin came out and said what? What is your perspective?
He basically came out and said, you see, I won because they dropped the lawsuit. Well, we had already decided to drop the lawsuit because you had given in immediately after we filed the lawsuit. But, Tim Griffin never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. I would have nothing to say on this issue at all about the lawsuit, about Tim Griffin giving in after the lawsuit, meaning what good lawyers learn is once the battle is over, you move on. But Tim Griffin can't move on. And if he's not going to move on, and if he's going to continue to poke the group in the eye, we're going to respond. So strikes me that the smart move would have been for him to move on. But like I say, that just doesn't seem in his character. So David Couch aptly responded and said, look, his words are, this is my characterization, but of what David said, unhinged. It's not the first time we've seen the AG become unhinged. It's likely not the last time we're going to see him become unhinged. The lawsuit would have gotten us on the ballot or gotten us through the AG's office. We've now gotten through the AG's office. There would have been another benefit, to be clear, of continuing to pursue the lawsuit, and that is that we would have likely put a stop to Tim Griffin's politicization of the AG's office. And we really had to think about whether we should do that for the good of Arkansans, but we ultimately decided that we must focus on our initial purpose, to save transparency for Arkansans. And so if we decide to go down two routes, well, that would be confusing to us and confusing to the public. So ultimately, we decided not to do that. And there still is a recourse for Arkansans to resolve the problem of Tim Griffin politicizing his office. And that recourse is the political process. That recourse is to challenge Tim Griffin in the primary some 3 years from now, when he's going to run again to be the Attorney General.
What's stopping you, Robert? Just why don't you jump in that race when it comes around?
We'll see if Conduit endorses me. How's
that? We don't get involved in constitutional race. No, but listen, going back to, and then we'll move on. David Couch's statement. He said, strong and bitter words indicate a weak cause. The Attorney General violated the constitutional right of every Arkansas voter. And I'll include his entire statement on our website. But I thought, one thing about Arkansas Citizens for Transparency and what you all did, it was such an interesting group that came together of smart experts in the field. But then this group, they really put the money where their mouths were, and they went across the entire state and spoke to people about what they wanted, because this truly was the people's amendment. And we saw what the people wanted during the special session, and the group really worked hard to deliver it.
Yeah, look, this, as you aptly point out, Ginny, this is a politically diverse group. You have people like me and Nate and Jimmy Cavan on the right. You have Clark Tucker and Jennifer sort of middle left. You have folks more on the left, as is at least generally perceived, like David, for example. Full spectrum. And we, as you say, went across the state. We didn't write this thing. I appreciate the compliment on our abilities, and I'm happy to take it. I'm certainly no shrinking violet when it comes to compliments. But the fact is, we didn't write this thing. We put the details in, or the right language in, reflecting the thoughts of Arkansans. And that's exactly the difference between what we did and the now seemingly defunct non-working group that the Attorney General had established to try to create his own fiefdom when it came to transparency. Oh, sorry, disclosure. And that's why we are doing the people's work, and the people will decide that answer. One of the comments that Tim Griffin made throughout this process was, well, you see, I, as the AG, have to be a gatekeeper because this is an unusual process to enact a law. Usually it goes through the legislature. That part is true. But then he went on effectively to say, well, when the people decide, I've got to screen it. Excuse me, the people are the most democratic part of the process. So you should be the most hands-off when the people are deciding. But you see, the difference between Arkansas Citizens for Transparency and Tim Griffin is we trust the people, and Tim Griffin doesn't.
I want to talk to you. That's an interesting point that you brought up. We trust the people. That seems to be a theme right now within the Republican Party. So I want to get back to that. Hold that. But recently we did have the AG on, and we really appreciate the fact that he came on Conduit and he talked about the process. And I recently saw another interview that he did, and he was pressed on the process. And he said, and the question was, but do you really think the process is working? And of course, and Griffin said, yes, absolutely. And here's why. What do you think could be improved with the process? What would you like to see happen? What do you think is broken with this process?
Well, I think Tim Griffin is what's broken with the process. I think he has politicized it, and he's pursuing as much as he can a process of throwing roadblocks in the way of those bills that he proposed and proposed constitutional amendments, to be clear, that he doesn't like, that are not in his favor politically. You know, what's interesting about Tim's career is it's embodied by the fact that his political interests drive what he does. Now,
Well, but
sometimes
he did just approve the abortion amendment,
Right.
and I would guess that that is one that he would not be in favor of.
That's right. After several iterations, he was forced to approve it because ultimately he had no choice. And so that's the thing. The same with ours, right? We proposed 3 constitutional amendments and 4 versions of the initiated act. And ultimately, he approved those too. So the fact that he ultimately approved different bills and proposed constitutional amendments that he doesn't like doesn't mean he didn't repeatedly throw roadblocks in an effort to stop them. That's what is broken about the system. He's not viewing his job the way it's supposed to be handled. That is, without politics, simply reviewing the ballot language, etc., not the contents of the proposal, to determine whether they are clear to the people. He's done much, much more. Indeed, he has objected to various aspects of our constitutional amendment that he then finally approved the day after we filed suit.
Jennifer Sandifer was on the Ellswick show this morning, and I have enjoyed listening to her interviews. She's so sharp, and she was talking about now collecting signatures for the petition and just the importance of making sure these signatures are valid. And I thought, you know, as people go across the state, you know, we saw that with the anti-LEARNs initiative. They did not have enough signatures. Some of the signatures were invalid. How important it is, especially time is short in collecting this number of signatures, how important and vital it is to make sure that these signatures are appropriate and valid and correct when collecting them.
Yes, indeed. Look, the right way to do it, what we intend to do, is to get far more signatures from far more counties than are required. In this way, we'll be on solid footing. That's our goal. We believe we can achieve it. And that's the process that we're starting. And that's why we are focusing on one thing and one thing alone: transparency, disclosure in Arkansas. That is what we are pursuing.
And I think it will be, I'm not saying this is an easy task. It's not at all as far as collecting the signatures, but this is not such a polarizing issue as it was with the anti-LEARNs initiative, where I think that how we saw people come together during the special session, how we've seen people collectively really want to see this transparency group get this passed. I think that it's, you know, it's going to be, people are going to, when can I sign?
Well, that's
when
the point,
and where
right?
can I sign?
That's exactly the point. That it is bipartisan. An abortion proposal is not bipartisan. Conservatives don't like, and conservatives shouldn't sign, and then they shouldn't vote for it. That's okay. That's democracy. This is bipartisan, right? And
Leave it in the hands of the people. I want to switch gears just a little bit. There's 2 other things that I want to talk to you about, but what you just said a second ago, that trusting these things and leaving it in the hands of the people, that is an overarching theme that we've seen somewhat over the past year, really past years, but it seems like it's become more heightened, I would say, in the past year here in the conservative movement and within the Republican Party as a whole. And just recently, the Republican Party of Arkansas sent out the call, that's an official notice about their state meeting coming up or the summer meeting coming up in May. Included in that, they gave the minutes and some other information, but then they included 2 proposed rules changes. And if you look at those 2 proposed rules changes, essentially together, both of those rules changes take power away from these grassroots organizations, from these local county committees. The first one takes a power away from these local county committees to pass a do not recommend resolution. Mind you, they already have to get a 2/3 vote, which is a very high threshold to begin with. as a county committee to pass a do not recommend against state level candidates.
Right.
This rule says, don't, you know what? County elections, your JP, you can pass those all day long. We do not want you interfering or influencing these state elections. We trust the voters to decide. All right. So that's the first proposed rules change. The second one has to do with the state meetings and changing the threshold from half to 2/3. And that's interesting because it essentially, again, takes power away from these local organizations. It's raising the threshold for the meeting that has the most grassroots representation. And so we can go into that. If people are curious about that, we go in depth on our website. But I thought you may really want to talk about the do not recommend resolution and this overarching theme of consolidated power, what seems to be consolidated power on the state level.
Well, you're entirely right. Of course you are. Why do we need a change in telling the county committees you can't vote on a do not recommend initiative, shall we call it?
Yeah.
Here's the travesty in having some local committee, some county committee say we don't recommend somebody. What is wrong with that? And of course, I'm a free speech near absolutist. If we have a local group that wants their voice heard, let them be heard. What are you afraid of?
Right.
And I make this pledge, Ginny. If any particular county committee wants to vote, do not recommend on any statewide candidate or hire, and we pass this rule, I'll come on your show and repeat their unofficial vote. No one can stop an unofficial vote. Anybody can meet in a parking lot whenever they want, and no one can stop it. I'll come on your show and I'll publish it also in my column in the Democrat-Gazette. The people of Arkansas, conservative and liberal alike, will not be silenced by the political elites. And we, like water, will find a route around the dam. It's that simple.
I thought that's so right. You made me lose my train of thought, Robert. I recently talked to someone in the Republican State Party, and I wanted an explanation. I said, look, I'm not going to tell you who I spoke with, but I said, look, I need you to give me the rationale. What is the reasoning behind this proposed rules change regarding the do not recommend? And I will tell you, people are having a difficult time coming up with the reasoning and the rationale behind it on record. They don't want to talk about it. They point to the language in the introduction of the proposed rules change. And well, it's not to influence, and it's, we don't want to interfere. We want to trust the voters. That's not why. But they have no way to defend it. There's absolutely no way to defend these proposed rules changes other than just come out and say, you know what? We don't trust these county committees with these things. And so we're going to take that away. Or, you know what? We saw how influential they were in some state Senate races by James Sturch. See you later. We didn't like that. We see that these county committees are picking up more on what they can do. These county committees are becoming smarter, understanding Robert's rules. So we've got to yank that away as well. If I'm wrong, I will encourage anyone to call me, text me, email me, tell me how I'm wrong. Tell me what is the rationale to take away do not recommend on the county level?
What's the rationale for still, to this day, after being repeatedly raised, we have not gone to closed primaries?
Oh,
So
well.
we have Democrats choosing our candidates.
Yeah.
And don't kid
we have
yourself.
Democrats are running.
Yeah, we have Democrats. You know why? Because they're choosing their candidates. That's why.
Yeah.
That's why. So we have a bunch of Democrats and some milquetoast Republicans mixed in amongst true conservatives.
You're right. You're so right. That is so true. So you have that coupled with conservatives who are so drunk on power that principles out the window. And so when you have those factors coming together, it's hard to combat. But I do think that from now until May, I think that it will be quite the battle. I think that these county committees will be quite informed. And I think that I don't think that it will be as easy of a win that the state party thinks it will be. I could be wrong.
Well, we saw that right at a recent state party meeting where there was kind of a split. There was an effort to consolidate power in the hierarchy of the party. That failed.
Yeah.
And then there was an effort to sort of disperse power more towards the local groups, and that also failed. So
Right.
the status quo seems to be a pretty good position, and perhaps we should stay there for a while.
Yeah. I thought we wanted to get rid of the status quo, Robert. I thought that's what we were doing.
I'm talking about the distribution of power between state and local party
Yes.
officials.
Yeah.
In other respects, you're entirely correct. The status quo for how we run government, that needs to be changed.
Yeah. Okay, the last topic I want to talk to you about, you recently started a series in the Dem-Gaz in your column about the University of Arkansas and one of their centers. It's the King Fahd Middle Eastern Studies Center. And we've covered this a little bit. I believe, I can't remember exactly when, it was a few months ago, when we caught wind that they were hosting an anti-Islamic event.
Oh, an anti-Israel event.
Yes, anti-Israel event. And we had, I believe we had you on to talk about it. We had Jay Green with the Heritage Foundation to talk about it.
That's right.
And I think that the University of Arkansas got enough pushback where they postponed the event till spring.
Is it postponed till spring? I'm not sure it's been postponed to any particular date.
Well, don't you know they're not going to come out and say it's canceled.
Right, I just think it was postponed into the ether is my point.
Yeah, it's we'll see what happens with that. Yeah. But talk to us about these two articles and why you are choosing to take this on right now.
And it's more than two, I think. I think we're up to 4 or so, and more to come, by the way. So
yeah, okay.
Stay tuned. Okay. Why? Because the flagship campus of the University of Arkansas runs a indoctrination center for Saudi Arabia and an anti-Israel agenda, clearly so, by the way. One of their professors up there decided to respond to my columns in the paper twice, as well as send a letter to my, or an email to the administrators at my law school. One can only assume why she did the latter, but I can tell you there was no effort to intimidate me at my law school. My academic freedom and freedom of speech has been fully protected and acknowledged there, and that's a good thing. But it's what's going on at the Fahd Center is teaching only one side, only one issue. For example, they had scheduled a woman to come talk there who's an expert on these religious killings, and then they canceled her. They canceled her. She believes in the right, of course, of Israel to exist. And then they said, well, you see, we wouldn't bring in somebody to talk. If we were talking about segregation, we wouldn't bring in someone who's pro-segregation. So they equated her with racists. Why? Because she believes in the right of Israel to exist? Is that the problem? What's the problem there? You know, when we look at the material or the statements that come out of the folks that work there, one individual posted on, I think it was Twitter, either Twitter or Facebook, he said, there's no commentary on the fact that the universities in Gaza are being shut down or bombed in the war, something to that effect. But I didn't see anything from him about the murders that went on in Israel.
Yeah.
And Alan Dershowitz, of course, the noted scholar from Harvard Law School, made a very salient point. He said, look, if you have people who criticize Israel for all sorts of things, and yet they don't repeat those criticism for any other countries, particularly those countries in the Middle East. That's a double standard, and a double standard that suggests anti-Semitism. That's a problem.
What would you say, though, to those who defend the university, defend the Middle Eastern Studies Center, and say, no, that's not entirely the case, Robert. We have had people come in and speak on the history of Israel and its Jewish people. You know, we have studied X, Y, and Z and had experts in about that. There has been a balanced conversation about this over the past several years. And so what you're saying is not entirely accurate. It's just contextual and you're just picking it apart. What would you say to
Okay,
that?
so let's look at how balanced. 35 classes listed amongst their course offerings that have the title Islam, Quran, Arab in it. Zero listed that say Jew, Christian, Bible. So is that unbalanced? The attempt to hold a talk, which is what you first covered, about the war in Israel with no Israeli or someone who supports the position of Israel, including the right to exist. A faculty member who posts on her office door a statement that says, much akin to what I was saying to you, hey, we don't, we often hear people say, if you're going to talk about what's going on in the Middle East, you better include the Israeli perspective, but we don't hear that about, say, segregation. So they equate the position supporting the right of the Jewish state to exist as the same as being in the KKK. She also, by the way, posted on her door of the university at Fayetteville a sign that said, Palestine from the river to the sea. Well, from the river to the sea are literally the borders of the state of Israel. So that is a call for the destruction of the state of Israel. And that was posted on her door. By the way, not only in English, in Arabic as well, for apparently that large contingency of Arab-speaking students that we have in Northwest Arkansas. So this is really, if this is the balance that they're claiming, that's not balance, Ginny. That's indoctrination. And it needs to stop.
Have you heard from anyone at the university about this?
No, other than responses to my Freedom of Information Act requests, which they have complied with perfectly. But I had made an invitation in one of my columns to one of these Fahdian fellows and to come on the Dave Ellswick show with me and debate me.
Yeah.
What are they afraid of, Ginny? Why are they afraid of hearing the other side? You know, they call many of these folks, I'm sure at the Fahdian Center, but elsewhere as well, who are vehemently anti-Israel, call Israel a colonizing state and call the Jews colonizers. Here's my question. You've heard of the Western Wall, which was a wall of the Holy Temple from about 20 BC. How did it get there?
Yeah.
Who built it? How can Jews be colonizers in a country in which they existed 2,000 years ago, before Arabs invaded the area in about 700 AD, before Islam even existed? How are the Jews the colonizers, not the Arabs? Now, I'm not calling for the removal of Arabs from the Middle East. That's history. That's development, but not recognizing that the Jews were the original inhabitants of Israel is beyond ridiculous. And so when this professor at Fayetteville says, well, we wouldn't have somebody who we equate with the KKK come speak. How about this? How about somebody who's aware of the history of Jews in the Middle East, doesn't ignore it, doesn't have a conversation that just starts at 700 AD and pretends there were no Jews at all ever, apparently, in Israel. Although another Fahdian said, well, the history of Jews in the Middle East was fine until the creation of Israel. What he doesn't say is, after the creation of Israel, the reason Jews had a difficulty in the Middle East is because 5 armies attacked the country of Israel, and every Arab state and Iran kicked out or killed virtually all of their Jews. Where's that part of the history?
Yeah, they don't want to talk about that.
No, Ginny, this place needs to be shut down.
Well,
Shut down entirely.
I was going to ask you, Chancellor, remind me of his
Robinson,
name.
Chancellor
That's right.
Robinson.
He's in his, he's relatively new, maybe
That's
in his
right.
second year now.
That's right.
And, you know, a lot going on. I know that he had to somewhat dismantle the DEI initiative and everything they had going on. I hope,
And we'll see.
And we'll see. It looks as though the Ideals Institute is still there and active, but I may be wrong about that. I may be wrong. If you were sitting down with him, with the Chancellor, what advice would you give him, and what would you hope that he would do about this center in Fayetteville? And do you even think that, do you think that people have a real grasp on the university is so large and it is so difficult to know everything that's going on in all of these departments and with every single professor? What would you like to tell him? What do you think he should do? And do you even think that the university has a big grasp on what's going on?
I don't know the latter. I've already told him in my columns what he should do. I'm happy to tell him in person over coffee or otherwise. Shut it down. Now, to be clear, you want to offer courses at the university on Islam? Knock yourself out. Great. I think it's a good thing. You want to offer Arab language courses? Knock yourself out. Great. But you have to disband this indoctrination center and have these courses rest in the relative departments in which they belong alone. So the religion courses belong in some sort of religion department. The language courses, of course, a language department, etc. That's the way this should operate. But this overarching entity, named after an autocrat who didn't allow women to drive cars, no less, go out in public unaccompanied by a man, no less. And you know, even the members of the King Fahd Center are so embarrassed by the name that they never use the term. They call it the Middle Eastern Studies something, MEST, M-E-S-T. I guess the S-T is the first 2 letters of studies.
Yeah.
It's kind of an odd name, but nonetheless, it reflects how awful this title is. And it also reflects this broader notion that I'm discussing here today, and I've discussed in my columns, and I will continue to discuss in my columns, that this is an operation unbecoming of the flagship of the lead system of education in Arkansas. It needs to go.
All right, well, we will follow this. And Robert, we really appreciate you bringing all of this to light in your columns in the Dem-Gaz. Anything else you want to add before we let you go?
Look forward to seeing you soon, Ginny.
All right, we'll talk soon. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.